Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm happy to see all participants coming from all over Europe for this special webinar today. Within the last few months of 2021, we've been working together with the European Company Lawyer Association, ECLA, on a very good study. We asked over 500 legal departments, where is our profession heading? And the big questions for today are going to be answered by two people. Maurits Annegarn, he is our second manager within Wolters Kluwer. And we have a special guest, and that is Marcus M. Schmitt, our general manager from the European Company Lawyer Association. Good morning, everybody. Maurits,
morning.
I hand the floor to you.
All right, so yeah, welcome everybody. And if we're going to be talking about some of the research results today before I hand over to Marcus, a couple more housekeeping items. First of all, if you're new to GoToWebinar, there is a questions option in your control panel that you can use to ask us any questions. Towards the end, we'll be more than happy to answer for as long as we have time in this session. We have a bit of time reserved for a Q&A. So feel free to post any questions you may have on the research or the things that we talk about. If you have any technical difficulties, you can post your questions there as well, and my colleague Jeffrey will be with you to help you out as soon as possible. So with that, Marcus, I think I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, good morning, Maurits. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this great webinar here. I'm very happy to speak to you today from the European Company Lawyers Association. As you might know, it's an umbrella association of in-house counsel associations all across Europe and represents roughly 68,000 company lawyers through their 22 different member associations. And of course, overall, the roughly 150,000 in-house counsel that we expect to be there in Europe. We're happy to talk with you today about the legal department and the organizational changes, especially in the last 2 years. And yeah, I can only emphasize on what Maurits just said. We're happy to take your questions also at any time. I'm happy if you interrupt me with the question box, and we can touch up on your questions at any time, obviously. Great, Maurits, shall we get started?
Yes.
Great. So maybe just some demographics to get you into the study. We have been conducting this study, Legal Departments on the Move 2022, together with Wolters Kluwer, among European legal departments and general counsel in particular. The questionnaire was sent out in late 2021, and people participated throughout November, December, starting early October. And we asked approximately 1,000 companies across the continent. We had a return ratio of 51%, and you can see that we have a quite representative approach all across Europe. You see to the right, we have 536 companies or legal departments that participated in this study. We had a focus though, although we asked many European countries, we had a focus on 5 jurisdictions, which was Germany, France, Spain, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And this is why we especially focused on have a balance between those 5 countries in order to not wash the results in any way. And you can see we basically have a representation based on GDP and roughly on population as well. That should be it for the demographic parts. It's the more boring part. Let's get straight to the numbers and things that interest you the most.
Numbers are only as relevant if you have a large enough sample size, right? And I think we have that with this research. So we have a couple of topics that we're going to touch on. These are not all the results in the report, of course. Tomorrow we'll be launching the full report, and it should be available to everyone for download, and you can review and make up your own mind what you think about the results instead of our vision of them. So the first part I want to talk about a little bit is one of the questions that we asked is, what part of the current organization and processes in your corporate legal department, that's what CLD stands for on this slide, would you improve most urgently? And we can see there that contract management and collaboration in the business seem to be seen as urgent necessities to upgrade by over half of legal departments. Still, we see that overall the numbers have decreased a little bit compared to 2019. And from that, we can derive that legal departments have actually worked on projects to improve these elements already. So really archiving some first successes in this regard, if you will. What's interesting is that collaboration has for a very long time in 2019, but also in other research before that, always been one of the top scoring elements, and it's now really one of the first years where it's not a #1. So really showing that a lot of improvement has probably been made in that aspect, probably partially due to the urgency also of the pandemic, right? We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. We see now that there's a new #1 in place, right, with contract management. I think it was #3 back in 2019 when we did this similar research. So now we see that there's really a heavy focus on contract management and improving that for legal departments. What's interesting also is that compliance has really moved up towards the 3rd place, right? So we see that there is an increased focus on that. I think personally, I think this also comes from the increased complexity of a lot of regulation and the importance of compliance for organizations. Right, more and more we see that it's not just something that is nice to do, but it's really a must-have in organizations to have a good compliance framework and good controls in place to take care of all these elements. Now, of course, it wouldn't be an overview about also a little bit technology and things that are happening in legal departments without showing AI, and we can definitely see it here in the 4th place. But I think definitely compared to a couple of years ago, AI has really become a thing for legal departments to actually look at, and it's also something that is becoming actually useful for legal departments. Very long time it's been really shrouded in hype, if you will. But it seems now that the future has finally come to legal departments as well. So that's really nice to see in this regard. So of course, we have more details on this urgent improvement in the full report, as I mentioned. But we also want to talk a little bit about some of the results that we got around digital budgets. So this is not talking about blockchain or Bitcoin or something. We don't mean digital money, but we actually mean budgets for digital projects and digital efforts within legal departments. And the question we asked was, has the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to the approval of a higher digital budget for your corporate legal department? And what is actually quite surprising is that we see very large amounts said, well, no, there hasn't been really an improvement there of the approval rating. Towards 25% that said yes. However, what we do see actually is that for a lot of legal departments, the budget wasn't necessarily approved, but more was spent anyway, because once again, of the urgency of taking action before waiting for a full plan and full approval. And on the other side, what we do see is that there is an increase in the amount of budget that is associated when there is budget assigned, actually, right? So it's being taken a little bit more seriously in this regard. And I think definitely this is due to the pandemic that they really see, okay, there is a necessity to assign budget. And still, if we look towards the past, there was an even larger amount of legal departments that didn't have any budget assigned whatsoever. Now, what I think is relevant here is that how do you get this kind of budget, right? So we asked the question, did you have to prepare like a business plan or a return on investment calculation in order to get a digital budget approved for your legal department? And there, surprisingly, we see a very large amount that said, no, I didn't really have to create a plan or anything. I just asked for a budget and I got the budget, right? Which is surprising. Maybe you should ask for more next time. Until you get to that threshold where you do have to explain yourself so you can really have the space to work on the projects that you need. But we do see definitely that for over a quarter of legal departments, they did need to create a business plan and an ROI calculation, return on investment calculation. And even that a minority of 3% used external consultants to work on return on investment cases. And I think it's easy to say that 3% is probably represented in the larger organizations, the larger legal departments that deal with budgets that come in ranges where it's very relevant to have an extra set of expert eyes to take a look at these kinds of things. Do you have any experience with this, Marcus, with this aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I can only emphasize what I'm always saying on those two slides. I'm a lawyer myself, and a return on investment calculation is not the natural thing a lawyer learns at law school to do. So I would say it's not the typical work you do in legal departments overall. And if we look at this slide, especially the return on investment calculation, you can certainly say that the participants, it's always a question how the participants also understand the question. Is it a very comprehensive return on investment calculation they will have to do? Obviously, then many people say, no, that's not what I did. To some extent, of course, all the general counsel and all the legal departments look into, in the aftermath, if a specific solution they maybe implemented and which they spent some budget on was actually worth it. So it's some sort they do a return on investment calculation. They might not put it into specific numbers and maybe not into a comprehensive set of numbers, but to some extent, of course, everyone is doing it. And it kind of reflects also the slide you showed before when it comes to the specificity of a digital budget. And you mentioned that already, which was totally surprising here for me is, and also a good message is that only 35% do not have specific budgets this year, which the number was double the amount, almost double the amount back in 2019. So it seems like along the maturity journey, we've come a long way in legal departments because budgets have been more and more specific. Nevertheless, of course, we had the discussion, Maurits and me, with legal departments. You can see that most of the legal departments in the last 2 years especially spent money on digitalization that was not budgeted in the first place because no one saw the pandemic coming. And then when everyone went home back in 2020, things just needed to be implemented if they haven't been there yet. So people say, yeah, I might be in the blue corner here with the 75% that I did not see an increase of the digital budget, but I'm talking about a real factual budget amount, but we have spent more money, definitely. So that, I guess, explains a lot of those numbers as well, and maybe that's your experience as well.
And I think that's also the story around creating a business plan or having a return on investment, right? You need a business plan in order to convince leadership to invest. With the pandemic, that is well, I wouldn't say business plan. What I would say it's the return on investment is instantly clear to people. Okay, we need to shift to remote working. Therefore, we need to take action. We need to assign budget. That in and of itself is already enough reasoning to take action, and you don't really need a definition for that. However, if you want to take next steps towards the future, you can expect, especially if you shift resources from traditional expenditure in legal departments, which is mostly spent maybe on external lawyers or actual people in your legal department. If you shift more of that towards digital projects, it's important to understand how to define such a return on investment case. So I want to share a little bit of a knowledge here on how you can do that, starting with the basis, right? So how to define a digital strategy. And really that starts with defining your goals, right? So where do I want to go, and the milestones. So what are the steps that I'm going to take to get to my eventual goal? Those milestones are important. I think for most people understand that concept. One thing that people tend to forget is that it's important to share your milestones with people and to report on them as you reach milestones, to celebrate a bit of success, because that creates engagement. But we can talk an entire hour about that kind of stuff, and I want to keep it a little bit limited. But the goals part is very important because that ties directly into some next elements that we're going to talk about. When you're defining your goals that you want to reach, before you start thinking about budget, it's important to consider a couple of elements. So we have people, processes, and technology. And with people, it's not just human resources, it's not just numbers, but it's also what skills do my people have? What other responsibilities do they have? And do my goals interfere with those elements, or do they need additional support for that? Then to understand which processes are touched by the goals that you're trying to achieve, or which process you want to improve. And finally, what technology you think might help with getting towards those goals. And important with that is that you can say, I think this technology will help this process reach an efficiency improvement of X. And to do that, it's important to understand a little bit how you can calculate these things. Right? Because if you want to get to a successful digital strategy, I believe that you need a budget assigned with it, right? So you can say that a successful digital strategy is goals, milestones, and budget to get there. So a little bit on return on investment principles. For this, we're going to take a look at a very classic case. In this case, the case of getting a contract created and finally signed, right? So there's a couple of steps in that. But really, we're going to compare a classic methodology to a modern methodology to see, okay, what does that look like? So let's take a look first, right? So in the classic sense, what we see, and this is based on some research done by the World Commerce and Contracting, or the former IACCM, in 2017, we see that the cost of creating a standard contract is around 6,000. We can have a very long discussion with all the lawyers in the room here on what is a standard contract. Let's just take it as a given, a standard contract here. Medium complexity around 18,700 euros, and high complexity or unique contracts can go up to 43,000 euros in cost associated with that. Now on the other side, we see that with digital solutions, that and this can mean a lot of different things. A savings can be reached on standard contracts of 45%, medium contracts of 35%. But interestingly, the high complexity and unique contracts, or as a lot of my customers always say, the fun contracts, really, the things that you do want to work on, not a lot of saving is reached there because it really requires tailored attention by legal professionals instead of software solutions to automate it. Right, now, how do you get to these numbers? You can also shift that into time, for example, right? So to make it clearer. So let's say, for example, a standard contract is based on, so we saw that cost earlier. Now, based on the average hourly rate of an employee in a legal department that is involved with contracting of 110 euros per hour, once again, based on the IACCM data, we can calculate that back that a standard contract has 54.5 hours of effort involved. This isn't one person sitting down and going endlessly for 54.5 hours, but it's every little moment and detail, every email sent, every bit of attention spent on that, or attention lost on other topics as well. And it's important to consider, if you get an email and you answer it, it might only take you 5 minutes, but it takes you 10 minutes of attention to shift to another topic. So the actual cost is, for example, 15 minutes. So we can see here that by really implementing some technology solutions, digital solutions, according to this data, you can create a savings of 24.5 hours or 2,695 euros per standard contract. Right? And if you have these numbers based on research done by trustworthy organizations, that last part is always important, of course, do good research, then if you have these numbers, you can create a story for investment saying, hey, how many contracts do we do each year? Per contract, this is the amount of time we can save, and this is the amount of money we can save. And this doesn't just go for contracts, it goes for other topics within the legal department as well. But when you're saving it on contracts, you're also freeing yourself up for these other topics in the legal department. So that's a little bit about return on investment and how you can work on these elements for budgetary approval, if you will. So let's look at a bit more research. So do you have anything to add to this, Marcus?
I just wanted to say, Maurits, I like the way you visualize that here, the return on investment calculation. It makes it very simple and should be easily adaptable among legal departments, especially those that have not been doing that in the past. Plus, you deliver some average numbers, which is a key resource as well to save time on research, obviously. But it definitely reflects on what we have been discussing over the last 5 years already, especially 3 slides ago when you said you do not save a lot of money in terms of complex work, because let's face it, that's exactly the work what the lawyers hired for in a company. The innovative work, the maybe even disruptive questions, the ones where legal knowledge and legal skills are really required. And digitalization and tools like, any tools can only help you where work gets repetitive, where things can be done on almost daily basis, but at least on a repetitive basis, we really have to do over and over the same things, and where you can save time by digitalization. And again, this is the typical discussion we have with digitalization legal departments all the time. This is not exactly the work of the lawyer to do repetitive tasks. It's the one to answer questions where answers have not been answered before, where questions have not been answered before. That's the work we have to do, and that's the complex part. So I like the visualization a lot.
Very good. All right, so let's move forward a little bit. So let's talk a bit about the future expectations for legal departments. Marcus.
Exactly. What we looked into and what we asked participants as well, apart from any budgets, is what's your expectation in terms of legal tech, and what's your today's work? So what you see here is on the left-hand side, you see the answers for your today work. We asked the participants, the General Counsel, how much of your daily work routine is covered by legal tech today. And then you see 2 percentages in that. That might be a little bit confusing, but I tried to explain that to you. So in that horizontal line, you see the amount of daily work. You see 1 to 20% of your daily work is been covered by legal tech. That's what 53% of all participants say. So at the moment, the amount is rather low. It's 1 to 20% of the daily work is covered by legal tech. But you also can see that already up to 100% of the daily work is covered by legal tech. That's 3% of General Counsel saying, well, obviously it's not 100%, it's more or less between 80 and 100%, maybe tending more to the 80, otherwise you wouldn't need the General Counsel any longer. But that seems to be companies, and we looked into it, that's companies that are from a more digital industry anyway, where tools play a big role, where the spirit plays a big role in the company anyway, and where digitalization has been going on for longer term, but also industries that technically have repetitive work all the time. We also ask, what's your vision? How do you see this coming in the next 5 years? And you see the expectancy is quite high across Europe. So you can see that 35% of the participants expect that approximately half of their daily work routine will be covered by legal tech in only 5 years. Whether or not that is a little bit ambitious, I would say that's for everyone else to judge. I would say it's quite optimistic, but also it maybe really reflects on how much repetitive work is been done in legal departments at the moment. And that's what people really want to get off their table, because they have so many very interesting and also very complex topics at their desk, which they can maybe not spend the required amount of time on, because they have this continuous repetitive work which they have been doing for years. So I guess the expectancy comes a little bit from what's actually on the tables. Very interestingly, we had a slight shift if you compare the numbers with the 2019 numbers, which you will see in the study once you download that tomorrow. We see that the expectancy came a little bit back. It was a little bit more to the right part in the right graph, where people expected that even more work will be covered by legal tech in only 5 years. It's not a significant change, but it is some change that is measurable. And I think that is for 2 reasons. First of all, legal departments have been, as I said already, traveled across the maturity journey already, but also more and more legal departments came to the awareness that not every tool that they use in the legal department is actually legal tech, but most of it could also be considered office tech. And that's differentiation that a lot of legal departments have been doing in the last 3 years, which has not been done before. I mean, we all know the times, and I'm talking about a longer time ago, where people might have said, well, of course I'm digital. I'm a lawyer. I'm working with Microsoft Word, so I'm using legal tech, which obviously is not legal tech. I mean, that's an extreme case now. Nobody in this audience obviously ever said that, but we've been doing that. But whenever you store contracts in a centralized database, that's already the question. Is that legal tech or is that office tech? And it's kind of a philosophic discussion, I guess, but maybe Maurits, you have an opinion on that as well.
We actually had a question on that in the question box from Tibor. How would you define legal tech in this context? So it's nice that you started answering that already.
Oh, great.
I find it very difficult. I think primarily technology that is designed with the lawyer first in mind, or with the legal department first in mind, can be defined as legal tech. But in the end, quite often, the activities that are done there, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of legal tech solutions out there where the end result can also be reached by spending a lot of time and effort on a more generalized database, whether it's your Microsoft Dynamics or your SharePoint environment. If you throw enough consulting effort at it, you can come to a very good solution to manage a lot of things. But it's about having solutions that are designed with a primary goal of supporting legal departments in mind, where in my opinion, it becomes legal tech. Now, there's a very blurred line in this. I like how you mentioned Word, for example. So we're actually with Wolters Kluwer in a partnership also with Microsoft for co-innovation. We published that last week. Where we're, for example, working on building on Word, because that's still one of the most popular tools used by lawyers. Okay, how can we bring interesting legal knowledge and know-how into Word automatically based on what activities they're taking there? So there, the line between office tech and legal tech starts to blur eventually. But as I said, in my opinion, it's legal tech when it's designed with legal in mind as a first priority.
Well, I sort of agree as well. I've been asked for the last 5 years, please define legal tech. And since I was asked that, I did some research for various definitions on what actually is legal tech. And up until today, I did not come up with a general definition of legal tech, but I more and more tend to come to the conclusion that the definition of legal tech really depends on the individual legal department, because you can judge on your own the best what is repetitive work, what can be taken over by software and what cannot. And that differs from really legal department to legal department, from industry to industry, from country and jurisdiction to other jurisdictions. And this is why I would say in general, I tend to agree with your definition, which is broader as well, but to give it a little bit of an individual aspect as well. Having talked about the complexity which lawyers are really hired for, we would like to focus on another topic, which is obviously a future-oriented topic, but that comes with quite a lot of complexity as well. And that's ESG. I guess a term that everyone has been using for the last 2 years at least, a term that was known under sustainability before, but I guess ESG is the term we use at the moment everywhere, and it arrived in legal departments in the last 2 to 3 years as well. Some of those have, of course, handled ESG projects even before, maybe under a different name. However, now it plays a role almost in every industry. And we have asked legal departments in that survey, if you consider your digitalization efforts in the last couple of years, do ESG projects actually have an effect on your digitalization efforts? And we asked basically, does it accelerate digitalization? Does it slow down your digitalization projects, or does it not have any impact at all? I don't know if you would say fortunately, but at least 55% said no, it does not have any impact or effect on our digitalization projects. However, 35% said no, this actually increased the speed, this accelerated our digitalization efforts, our digitalization strategies, because we came to the point to realize that only if we are properly digitalized, we can handle those complex systems and those complex inquiries from the business side in the future. 10% said, yeah, those ESG projects actually slowed down our digitalization efforts. And those companies, we looked into the demographics of those companies, are usually represented by small and medium-sized companies where the legal department is short on staff anyway, short on capacities anyway, where either the small team has to handle both now, the daily, or three things actually: daily business, the digitalization efforts, and on top now the new inquiries by the management with regards to ESG. We also try to look a little bit deeper into the answers and ask for those participants that say that their digitalization projects have been accelerated. And Maurits, if we flip the page, we ask what exactly has been accelerated in your legal department. And you can see that the majority, 64%, and I guess that reflects on what I said before, say we identified new digitalization projects, so new ways to work digitally, new things to be taken over by software. 44% even said we started those digitalization projects. So those were pretty quick in moving, although they had all the challenges with COVID, which we are going to speak about later on as well. 44%, I would say that's a significant number, and it also shows the how vital legal departments really work across Europe, and how quick they react to the new challenges. Some companies, 29%, also said the time frame of our digitalization projects has just been shortened, and 22% were as lucky as saying, yeah, it increased our digital budget. That's almost every fourth legal department. So that's, I think, a big message in terms of ESG. Just to finalize the numbers here, 17% even say that more staff has been allocated to digitalization projects in order to finalize those first before we expect those more complex projects to come around.
Well, that would have been the primary number in the past, right? Just throw more people at the problem in order to solve it. So it's interesting to see a shift there. It's quite, for other topics in the past, allocating more resources or increasing external spend would have been a higher answer in the past. So definitely see some more digitization playing a bigger role in these situations.
Certainly, because I mean, yeah, you could also say maybe legal departments are the or belong to the departments in a company that have been touching up on digitalization in a later stage. Other departments in companies have been digitalized first. And since they had good experience and hopefully good experience, now it arrived in the legal departments as well, obviously.
Yeah.
Maurits, if there are any questions to these slides, interrupt me at any time because I cannot see those questions. But
I'm keeping an eye on the questions. Cool. Nothing new so far.
All right. Well, then let's look on the other side of the medallion. We also inquired those 10% that said that the ESG project kind of impacted as a slowdown on a digitalization project. So we said, how do you cope with that? How do you come along with it? How do you react to that? And that's an unfortunate number, 48%. That's almost half of them said, yeah, we're just postponing our planned digitalization projects. I'm actually very interested to see how that number evolves over the course of this year, because everyone who said that also, when I was in a discussion with them, said, yeah, but we might end up regretting that in a longer picture, because it will come eventually, and postponing it is never a good thing because you have to start from scratch maybe again. You have to do things again. So those 48% are really unlucky saying that, and unhappy saying that, obviously. We had 30% that reacted by downscaling planned digitalization projects. I think this kind of goes into the same direction in the long term. So let's see how that works out. However, and here we are back to your point, Maurits, almost a quarter of the participants, of those 10% that said it worked as a slowdown, they increased or reallocated staff within the legal department to cope with this slowdown of digitalization projects. I guess those are the lucky guys among the ones that impacted as the slowdown. Another 23% came up with the idea to leverage on synergies. I mean, that's obviously the golden way to leverage on synergies between the ESG projects and the digitalization projects.
Yeah, and I think this, what you mentioned, like where people are saying, yeah, I'm going to regret that decision. We sometimes see that with new clients, where it's quite often they come to us at a stage where they say, I should have taken action years ago, but now I'm really in a pickle, if you will, in a moment where I really need to take action. And I think it's a shame, especially if you have projects already planned, to postpone them. I mean, if you postpone them for a little bit and you set a clear date and you say, hey, in 3 months we're going to get this started instead of this month, that's fine, but make sure that if you postpone that you at least plan a starting date, because we all know what happens to plans that are postponed and not replanned.
Yeah, everyone has that experience, that's for sure. Taking into account that ESG plays a role in literally every aspect and field of law, may it be finance, may it be, of course, environmental law, M&A aspects, corporate law, it plays a role everywhere now. We also asked the question, what do you believe is a properly digitalized legal department having an advantage over non-properly digitalized legal departments when it comes to tackling the challenges of ESG? And you see a very clear message here from the European legal departments. It's roughly 80% of the company lawyers across Europe that say, yes, if you did your digitalization properly, you are well prepared, or at least better prepared, to handle ESG inquiries, ESG projects, and the complexity of those. Still 22% say, yeah, no, the state of digitalization does not have any effect on our ESG projects. That's already an individual answer, obviously, but I think the picture, the overall picture here is clear. It's complex, it's new, we all have to work in there. There's not a lot of regulation and experience and even cases on that. So something lawyers have to be, what they're trying to do, innovative again. And for that, you need some food for thought and some time for thought. And this is why software and digitalization obviously helps to get that time free.
And I think it also highlights the importance of organizations such as the European Company Lawyers Association, right? Where you can get information from your peers and at least support on how are you handling this and how are you working around this. And we have a question from Caroline.
Yeah,
we have a question from Caroline. She says she's not sure whether it's going to be part of the full survey, but her question is, which ESG triggered digitalization projects were started by legal departments? And we had a bit of a conversation around this.
Can you say that again? I had a little crack here in the line.
Which ESG triggered digitalization projects were started by legal departments?
Which ESG projects trigger digitalization in legal departments?
Or ESG triggered digitalization projects. So I think she's asking, can you mention specific digitalization projects associated with ESG?
Sure.
I think we had a conversation on this already when we were preparing for this.
I mean, it blows into the same horn as every other field of law. It's obviously, whenever you build something in your innovative work on expertise, it's great to get to that expertise in a short amount of time. And that means you need a proper knowledge management for what you have been doing in the past. Plus, especially in terms of making your contracts, for example, ESG ready in the future, you would like to have those available at no time as well. In order to make them ready. Plus, and this is something that ESG might not be, that digitalization might not be able to solve yet, you need to build up on the experience of your colleagues, of your peers, especially on a European level. So yeah, when it comes together, I would say it's the digitalization of knowledge, which is the most important part. And here maybe that answers the question, maybe not. So Maurits, please add something.
Well, I think
if you have anything else to add.
It's as you mentioned, right? It's not specific projects to digitalize ESG activities of legal departments. It's digitalization that frees you up to take these activities on, right? That makes sure that you can focus on them properly. And I think, yeah, I mean, we're kind of doing this together, this slide where you were going to present most of this, but I think some of these topics here mention that as well.
Right, get the repetitive work off your table to focus on that. That's the golden rule, I guess. But we have it here combined again. Structure information across the legal department. Tackling ESG and digitalization projects at the same time can be very challenging. Most of you might have experienced that already. And obviously, you want to focus on digitalization when it comes to the communication between you and your internal client, the business. Also, again, to recover of what has been said in the past to make things easier for you to access. And that comes with the use of a centralized data to also gain insights for the future, what has been said in the past, and that's knowledge management, which I see as a key for that. I think we brought, yeah, thank you very much, Maurits. We brought a general statement in terms of ESG, which is, and I think we said it 5 times now, so maybe that's the key takeaway for this session, is digitalization makes repetitive and low complexity work efficient, giving the freedom to focus on complex challenges such as ESG and all the inquiries we have there.
Yeah, and I think you can replace that final part, as you said, complex challenges. If you ask the same question, what was it, 8 years ago or something like that, it would have said GDPR, for example.
Or
right?
compliance.
It's anything new that's coming up.
Exactly. And I mean, the interesting fact about ESG, and that's what most legal departments see now, because I always hear the argument ESG is the new compliance, but it adds one more aspect on top. In terms of compliance, you always had high fines the company would have to face if they wouldn't be compliant with regulation. In terms of ESG, you have another aspect on top, which is the reputation of the company, which comes under scrutiny if you do not focus on specific ESG projects, and especially if they are taken into the broader audience, and then you have a shitstorm coming along. So that's another big risk, which is which you can count in money, obviously, and sometimes even exceeds the fines that you had in complex compliance measures in the past.
Yeah.
So a very interesting field of law, and as you mentioned before, this is also an aspect we could talk for hours on.
Unfortunately, we don't have hours anymore, so we're just gonna move on a little bit into final segment, really, in the organizational response on COVID-19. So one of the questions that we asked is, what has significantly changed regarding the internal processes in the legal department? Right. Well, I think the top result is quite obvious, right? Higher acceptance of remote working. I mean, I'm at home. I believe you're in the office today, Marcus. But I think for a lot of people, working from home has become more of the norm than a rarity, especially the acceptance of it, 85%. I mean, numbers really don't lie in this regard. But also very interesting, the widespread use of electronic signatures. I've been in the legal tech business, so to say, for over 10 years now. I can remember people asking me, is that even legal to have an electronic signature? And I think the moment where you came into a situation where people are at home, don't have access to a printer, and need to still move the business, then suddenly acceptance was done. And I think we really see that now in how widespread usage of electronic signatures is, and we'll see that number rising higher and higher as more businesses fall in line with that. What's interesting also is the flexibilization of working hours, especially in larger organizations where the traditional 9 to 5, 9 to 6 is really baked in. It's interesting to see this, and I think it's part of people are working from home, people understand it, especially if you have children or other challenges, people need to take additional time during the day, especially during the winter months in Northern Europe. It's nice to see the sunshine every once in a while. So having that flexibility, I think, is a very healthy choice, especially in more stressful situation. Also quite interesting is the introduction of corporate e-meeting and e-voting. I think it's something that's also very good, but definitely a response, right? A lot of countries, you needed in-person voting during shareholders meetings, for example. Yeah. How are you going to do that if everybody's sitting at home? So suddenly the law became very flexible, and that also sees a rise in new solutions that support that. And I think the e-meeting part is logical in this sense. I see some more questions coming in, but because we're a little bit stretched for time, I'm going to save them for the Q&A. But we do see your questions. If we don't get to them in the Q&A, you can get a personal answer from myself or Marcus. I promise that. What has changed, significantly changed regarding collaboration with internal clients? There we really see the strengthening of document automation processes. I think that falls hand in hand also with the increased attention to contract management, because contracts are often based in documents, or at least they start there. But also with providing more proactive legal advice, so really legal departments working actively to stretch themselves into the business, to communicate into the business in order to really find where the problems are and proactively provide that advice. But also very interesting, the introduction of self-service modules, especially with everybody working remotely. It's just easier if there are ways for people to help themselves instead of creating this backlog for the already overworked legal departments in a lot of organizations. And finally, what I find very interesting is the introduction of legal hotline availability remotely. I think that's really cool and really nice to see that a lot of legal departments are really embracing new solutions, new ways of communicating, new ways of gaining information out of their organization. So very promising, and I hope we can continue some of this trend into the future at least. I want to talk a little bit about this automation of document process, because it sounds very easy, but actually there's a lot of different elements to creating a document that can be automated and can be approved on. Roughly, it's the creation phase, the review or negotiation phase, approval, execution of the contract, and finally the management stages. So when we look at a traditional old-fashioned situation, there's already maybe templates for your documents, but you know what? Everybody has their latest and greatest version that they're very proud of and has worked for the last 6 years. So why not continue using it? But it's a situation of decentralized management, basically. And eventually that will lead to a draft document, though the quality is to be confirmed. Getting into a review stage, traditionally it means sending it out to somebody to review, then a version comes back, and then you basically go into this online email back and forth, where eventually you get to a nice finalized document with often a great title as well for the document. When you then get to the approval stage, because you don't have quality control on your templates, you don't have necessarily quality control on your review process, it's not always fully clear who needs to approve what and whether it's correct what they're approving. So the approval stage can be quite a complicated process with a lot of back and forth, and even sometimes back to the drafting stage if there's mistakes in the original drafting situation, though you hope to get that out in the review stage, of course. Finally, execution, and well, we saw the number 73%, but this slide is presenting a picture for that 25-ish% that don't have e-signatures yet. If you want to get something signed manually, yeah, you can wait on somebody to print it, take it to their desk, spill coffee on it, print it again, sign it, go back, scan it, put it in an email, send it out, and then repeat the process for the number of signatories you have. And finally, the traditional way of managing a contract is to store it somewhere and forget completely about it and not really take any action. Now, if we look at a more digitalized and automated document automation process, we can start from a management perspective. We take data from our systems, such as counterparty information and contract specifics from our central repository, and combine that with a centrally managed template, so a template managed by the legal department to automatically create a draft document for which we know this is the final version of our template, so there's no surprises in there. Then going into an online document collaboration portal where you can work together in a document in real time, similar to what you can do with Office 365, but then made specific for legal departments. So taking into effect that while Marcus is working on one clause, he doesn't want me to make any changes to that specific clause. So having some intelligence for legal departments in there. Maybe that's the difference between legal tech and office tech markets, but that's a different topic. Finally, when you get to the approvals, if you have an automated system that can take the data that has gone into the template into consideration, such as, for example, contracts are more than 10,000, so certain people need to approve, your approval process can be automated and made easy in order to flow through that. Once again, there's some product names here, obviously Wolters Kluwer products, so if you have questions, we can answer them in another session, but this can be any kind of solution. There's a lot of solutions on the market that solve this problem, but this is what it looks like when it's all tied together. Well, digital signatures, don't need to explain that, but it's nice that everybody can sign at the same time, so you get a lot of speed and efficiency. You don't have to wait on each other. And then finally, it can return into your management system where it can be processed, readable, findable because it's automatically turned into an OCR PDF, and then fed into your reporting until it's time to do an amendment on the contract or an extension, and you go into the next round. That's just to give you an idea of what such an ecosystem can really look like, but you can take it even further. If you want to really start supporting the business, it's important to use also the information that you have in the legal department to really support them in that regard. So once you start creating an ecosystem, right, to integrate solutions with each other, you can really help your organization spend less time, right? So you can share data across systems from a single source. And I will give a couple of examples in a moment. Make it easier for non-legal people to make new contracts or other legal documents, and really in that way have a single view of all legal activities with parties, right? So you can all do this with digitization. You can increase accuracy by making sure that there's a single entry point. There's less risk of mistakes made by people in the business, right? If somebody is using your template in the solution that you picked to create a contract, you have control over the steps that they take to get to a final legal document, making sure that the accuracy is much higher and there's less mistakes. But there's also AI that comes into play here that can read data from documents so that there's less manual entry involved, making the chance of mistakes less there. So there's a lot of different options, but I just want to give you some aspects of what it can improve. And finally, what's very important is that by implementing such solutions, you can really support the business. Makes it easier for them to self-service themselves. And where you make it easier for the business to serve themselves, it suddenly becomes easy for them to provide legal with the data that you need. Right? If you give them a great solution to draft documents, they will provide you with the metadata that you need to properly manage legal risk within your organization. But it's basically a give and take situation. Some relevant integrations for legal departments, so where you can connect your legal tech solutions with other solutions in your organization, are of course the document cycle that I just managed, right? Negotiation, collaboration, drafting, signatures. But you can also think about, for example, the ERP systems, the enterprise resource planning systems in your organization. For example, maybe you have an SAP or Microsoft Dynamics environment that has all of the vendors and suppliers that are approved by risk management in your organization. Well, you want to have them automatically synchronized to your legal solution so that when you're creating contracts, you actually do them with the right legal party instead of just a name that a salesperson wrote into the system that might not be fully legally accurate. Right, so it makes it easier to register contracts and deals, or to integrate with your CRM, right? To make it easier for your commercial organization to create contracts in an actually accurate way that you can track and control what's actually going on there, making that self-service easy while tracking progress on their side. So then a final little bit, Marcus.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. That draws a perfect world picture, I would say. But yeah, we would like to conclude by showing you the third aspect. Maurits has just touched upon how COVID affected the internal view of your legal department, then the internal view of your company, so the collaboration with your clients. Now we will shift the picture and look into how it could have effect or how it affected your collaboration with external law firms. And we can make this really short because the numbers are also much lower here than the 80 and 70% numbers that Maurits was just showing. But what has been the major result is, of course, the optimization of legal spend management and the utilization of e-billing. I could very well imagine that this does not come as a surprise for most of the listeners. We also see a higher utilization of document collaboration software, which Maurits has just been talking on, just to speed up things and to make them more easy to access, even though you're working remotely. But of course, also the capability in tech interfaces to exchange data, to not have those frictions all the time whenever you share data, and the automation of legal processes. Still, 1/4 has experienced that effect by the COVID-19 pandemic. But I think we have a lot of questions, or we have some questions left, Maurits, and
We do.
We have 10 minutes to go.
I was that's why I was hurrying up a little bit before as well. So looking at some of the questions here, I want to start with a question from Mark. Let me quickly scroll up a little bit so I can read the entire question. Oh yeah, I think this question is for you, Marcus. Who is the owner or responsible person in the company to develop or establish ESG routines? Should the legal department take on this role?
Well, that's, first of all, it's a great question, not an easy answer. But the second part of the question, should the legal department take that role? I would say that's certainly a yes, if that's possible. That makes you even more visible as a business enabler. But obviously, ESG comes from various aspects within the company. So you can look into developments in terms of ESG in various European companies, mostly driven out of the management and the management goals, obviously. But of course, legal is one of the first to touch upon those aspects in order to get them into a legal framework and to make them actually be yes, even legally sustainable. You see good, you see bad examples across Europe. I think you all have been covered, or you all have been following the Danone case, the French company that also makes the yogurts you might have in your fridge. They took ESG to another level. They really cared about the ESG projects a lot. But at the end of the day, the CEO had to leave because they forgot to make any profits, which obviously is something in terms of the balance which the shareholders then didn't like so much. So it's really an aspect where the legal department can position itself as a business enabler and looking at all the factors in terms of how have we been doing business in the past, how we can do it in the future, how we can follow up on those ESG projects and even prevent maybe bad reputational risks to the company, but also don't forget obviously to make the profit at the end of the day.
Yeah, so really needs to come from central strategy of the organization. Legal department can then make assessments on the risk exposed or that's already available and basically act as the moral compass in that regard to move the organization in the right direction. So they definitely play a large role, but it needs to come from central management.
Definitely, but also from legal, since we experienced that in the European Company Law Association. Whenever there's an exchange in between general counsel and they learn that there are several aspects of ESG already developing. For example, in Denmark, the Spanish GC can touch up on these and bring this into their company and even react further, bring it up to the management and to that centralized strategic department as well, of course.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, we see maybe last point to that, and we see more and more legal departments that actually come up with ESG responsible lawyers in their legal departments. They might be called global citizens or ESG responsible, but we see more those positions to be filled.
Yeah, and I think that only makes sense. I mean, it's not just from a we need to do right perspective, but it's really also tied into heavier and more complex legislation. So it only makes sense that somebody is specialized in that and is focuses on those elements. So then I see we have one more question. It might be an easy answer. Do you have any idea how budgets for legal departments have changed this year?
Well, certainly digitalization and also with the pandemic is continuing to grow. Actually, we see the acceptance, as you showcased the numbers already, of remote work and of flexible working hours, which comes of course at a technological challenge to make the communication proof, to store the data also in a proof way at home. So various digitalization aspects have to be covered by legal departments, and this is what the budgets see overall. But we also have seen some sort of, let's say, finalization of certain aspects of digitalization that were initiated due to COVID that have been introduced now, and you now have more or less the running cost, but not the initial upfront investment. So in some sense of that investment cost, the budgets came down a little bit, but in terms of new ways of working together, the budgets are still high, and therefore there is availability there to further digitalize the legal departments.
Very good. I think that's a nice message also to close off with today. So tomorrow we will launch the report together between European Company Lawyers Association and Wolters Kluwer, and hopefully it will give you some new insights, at least understand where you can place yourself when it comes to your peers. And learn a couple of new things. Of course, if you have any further questions on anything that we discussed today, want to learn more about European Company Lawyers Association or Wolters Kluwer, or any of the products that we offer, feel free to reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn, and hopefully we will see you next time.
And maybe even physically. Exactly. I just wanted to conclude by saying, even though the pandemic is still raging, we would be happy to have this presentation in person with you and other participants as well, because again, collaboration digitally works well, but of course, the personal aspect of discussing certain aspects might come too short from time to time. So we're very happy to have this conversation with you at one or the other meeting physically in the future as well. So thank you very much for listening. And thanks, Maurits.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thanks a lot.